Donald Trump has several legal problems right now, and he's had his home searched, the first former president to ever face that level of criminal scrutiny. So there's a lot of problems and a lot of different jurisdictions. He needs good lawyers. And yet, as the Washington Post and other outlets have reported, many are saying no. They don't believe they can represent him because of the way he is, the way he acts, and the way he doesn't pay his bills. Some say he's virtually impossible to represent. Indeed, this is a big story. There's many examples, but we are thrilled to tell you, as we always go to the sources when we can, we have exactly one of these seasoned, respected lawyers who simply turned down a request to represent Trump. A little more context, the former OAN host Christina Bobb is now on the legal team. She was at Mar-a-Lago to observe. Now, Trump has wanted to make a public spectacle of complaints about all this, but very little from his lawyers on actually challenging the search.
I'm wondering, are you not concerned that because you didn't join any of these motions for, again, the full release of this affidavit, that you're then waiving possible objections to the way redactions are being done by the Justice Department later on?
Well, we would maintain that we haven't waived our right and that still is maintained. We need to wait and see.
Well, is that a job that our next guest wants? Apparently not. He turned down exactly answering those kinds of questions, which can be difficult if you represent Trump. And he says in public this was unconstitutional, but then in court, they don't even so much as lift a finger. So let's get into it. We have a former Watergate prosecutor and former Assistant U.S. Attorney John Sale. He represented Mr. Giuliani in the congressional probe regarding Ukraine, and he has confirmed, without disclosing any client confidences, that he passed on the request to represent Donald Trump here. Welcome to the Beat, sir.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Yes, sir. Why did you pass?
Well, without violating any confidences, it's really, I can only speak to my own experience. And my own experience was, it was a legal discussion. I made it clear I was not going to participate in the political agenda. The political agenda has to coexist with the legal. I understand that, but you're talking about the former president. But I was going to strictly be a lawyer, and we talked about legal issues. And I thought some of these legal issues were extraordinarily interesting and complex. But when I had a little time to reflect about it, this is not a sexy, exciting answer, that I think it's a full-time job. Mm-hmm. The government has a team of attorneys. This is the only case they have. And I would have had to take a leave of absence, basically, from my law practice, from my law firm. So I just was not in a position to do it. But I got to say, to be perfectly candid, when I sort of said if I would have done it, I would have not participated in the political aspect. Within a day or two, I would have broken that rule. So I would have, and I would like to do it now, I would have spoken out as strongly as I can against the rhetoric and the threats and the anti-Semitism and the defunding the FBI and the threats of the judge. And I have to say, I don't think that served the former president, serves him well. And I think that every responsible person, lawyer, should denounce that.
You say every responsible person. Do you think Donald Trump should use what is a considerable following here to tell people to stop menacing the FBI, to tell these MAGA allies, as you've mentioned, to stop using hate, anti-Semitism, and racism against people who are just public officials doing their job?
Well, I don't mean to duck your question, but I'm only going to speak for myself. And I find it more than reprehensible, and I would have no part of it.
Understood. You said that your answers thus far might not be sexy or exciting. That's fine, sir, as long as they're true in the journalistic realm. That's fine.
And if I did the representation, I would have done it honestly and ethically. But I don't know about any other lawyers. They did not express any dissatisfaction with the present legal team. Now, I don't know if they are dissatisfied or not, but that they just didn't go there with me. They just wanted to build a team. I just was not in a position to do it.
Yeah, and I want to ask another question. I want to be respectful. We are both members of the bar, and I'm a journalist that wants to be respectful. So I'm not intending to demean any particular lawyer, but there's levels to this. And a president facing a big the big type of cases that he has needs certain levels. You are at a different, higher level than some of the individuals that we have seen come out, just in terms of experience, seasoned, federal prosecutorial experience, etc. Do you see any gradations here in who Trump and his advisors are reaching out for in certain places? Because we've observed, for the benefit of your response, that they have heavy hitters in Georgia more so than in, say, Florida right now.
Well, without disparaging anybody, of course they need somebody with serious federal criminal experience. And I mean, there are some issues that I spotted right away, which I would have done. I don't know what the present lawyers know, so I'm not criticizing them. But for example, with the documents, neither side, neither the government nor the Trump side knows what's there. And they're using a filter team, the government, in order to review these documents for privilege, various privileges. Attorney-client privilege, executive privilege,
right,
the deliberative process privilege. Well, I would immediately have gone to court and asked for the appointment of a special master. I would not trust the government to be doing that.
Let me just slow you down, and then you can continue. But you're making an interesting legal point, which, again, the law, as you emphasized earlier, is different from one's political or personal feelings about the various players involved. You're saying that, given your experience in this field, you think the right, adept legal move would have been to try to get the court, a judge, to force more independence on that situation. I mean, the average person in the average search complaint isn't just going to get a special master, but you think, based on your experience, a judge might look kindly on that given these issues. And you think, basically, if I'm simplifying, they missed that opportunity.
I think that's what I would have done, but it's not my original idea. It's happened several times in the Southern District of New York, including in the Giuliani case and in other cases, and it's worked very well. And that's one of the things I would have done. You know, I think next Thursday there's going to be a media frenzy, and they're going to be very disappointed because all that's going to happen is there are going to be proposed redactions. I think they're going to redact virtually everything. The judge is going to decide, and if the government isn't satisfied with it, they're going to have a stay, and it's going to be reviewed by the district court. So I don't think we're going to see anything next Thursday.
Let me ask you one more thing that's come up a lot, and I hear it actually from viewers. Donald Trump has skipped out on a lot of bills. There's evidence of that, there's documentation of that, and there's past lawyers who filed supporting evidence on that. When you looked at a case like this, did you take that as a given that had you taken the case, he might not pay the bills?
I can only speak to my experience. They did not expect that I would work for nothing, and I was satisfied with the assurances.
Well, sir, now I got to
given.
give you the follow-up. I'm not saying they said you would work for nothing. I'm saying that in the past, Donald Trump has not paid all the bills. Is that something that you factored into your decision?
I was comfortable that I would be paid.
So you think he basically pays some people and not others? That's just how it works.
I don't know that. I don't know that. I mean, all I knew is.
Well, hold on. Now I got to really lawyer you. You know what I'm talking about. He definitely has stiffed certain people. But yes, you're right that there are some high-level people that sometimes do get paid, and we're on the outside reporting on it. He might say, well, Mr. Sale, if we got him, he's a heavy hitter, we don't want to mess with him, we got to pay him. Did you have some assurance that somehow you were in the non-deadbeat group?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily adopt your word, but yes, I had assurances that I'd be paid.
Interesting.
And I was very comfortable with that.
Last question. Do you have any view of Drew Finling, who is handling it in Georgia? We've reported on him, and he's got a lot of experience.
I only know what I've read about him, so I have no personal experience with him.
Well, Mr. Sale, you're right out of central casting as a serious attorney, and I appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, sir. Hope to have you back.